Welcome to Not Suitable for Democracy, the show about the problems facing American democracy and sometimes how to solve them through organizing. I'm your host, Nick, and on today's show, we're going to discuss the war in Iran, from the past 48 hours to what this means for the future. Now, this is a developing story, and events may have changed by the time you listen or watch this podcast. And there are facts and figures flying around from all over the world, but we're going to do our best to parse that out. Well, we have a lot to discuss, so let's get into it. Real quick, before we begin, if you like what you hear and want to learn more, then make sure to subscribe to Not Suitable for Democracy. You can subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube. We have now entered a new era of global politics, and this past weekend will have changed the course of history forever. Now, at about 9:40 a.m. on Saturday, February 28th, the people of Iran had woken up to airstrikes from both the United States and Israel. These airstrikes were conducted by President Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu. This has been in the works for quite some time. And we know that because Prime Minister Netanyahu had visited President Trump an upward of 7 times within his second term of office. Now, American presidents don't meet with diplomats that often in such a short period of time. Sometimes they do, but it's not frequent. So we knew that from these close conversations that Prime Minister Netanyahu had pulled in U.S. support, knowing that Israel is right in the region. So in order to work together, in order to diffuse whatever they thought was necessary. From this point, we know that President Trump, shortly after, announced on television to the American people in a white baseball cap with USA emblazoned that is when we had decided to share with the American people that this was necessary to be done, saying that in order to take out Iranian leadership, that this would put safety in the world, but then also saying how this was a mission to free the Iranian people. Now, to be fair, the Iranian government is a very oppressive government, and the supreme leader of that government ruled with an iron fist. So with all these atrocities happening under the Iranian government, this was Trump's way of enacting another sort of regime change as if it was a noble cause for everything he's doing. Now, on top of that, we are also going to see a lot of misinformation and propaganda coming from all over the place. President Trump was making the argument this was necessary to be done, even saying that for any American casualties that occur, that's just what happens when war happens. He gave a very ill-worded quote, basically trying to make the case that, that casualties are just part of the game and we should just let it happen. Meanwhile, this war should have never happened and it should have never taken place under any president under any side of the aisle. So the fact that we are now in this position, thanks to President Trump, who campaigned on no new wars, he has now upped that ante with this conflict with Iran. So from that point on, in the morning, we knew that the early strikes had caused damage. Now, on top of that, what Iran had planned already is that they had known that if they were to be ever, have strikes against them from the U.S., that they would retaliate by striking U.S. Navy bases. Because that was part of the plan already, they were able to act on it fairly quickly, only within the hour maybe even, of the first strikes against Iran. So they quickly returned fire. With that said, this did harm several U.S. Navy bases. And on top of that, we know that this was the start of a 12-hour back and forth. From that point, we knew that the earlier strikes from the United States and Israel, this was done very, very strategically, calculated by both governments. And why would they strike at 9:40? Well, both Israel and the United States had a plan. In Israel, they called their plan Lion's Roar. very named in order to like project some sort of strength, right? With the roar of a lion, of course, these are bombs. Whereas then the United States, the way they named their operation was Operation Epic Fury, right? Also, kind of a nod to Trump's fire and fury that people would characterize him from his first term. Now, the first thing is that from past excursions between Israel and Iran, Israel usually doesn't strike during the day. They usually strike at night. Now, in this case, this was 9:40 a.m., so definitely a breach of protocol and definitely changed their norm. Now, from the United States, they actually decided to do it on a Saturday, much like what we saw in Venezuela. And the point of this actually was to really consider the oil markets. Now, they knew that the stock market and the oil markets closed for end of week. So that wouldn't necessarily shift any of the price stability or costs in the industry. This was very, very calculated and very shrewd, and it just really says how these wars are planned not just from the president, but these are across industries, titans of industry, as they say, but also really doing what's going to cause the most harm to the opposite side, but then also least harm to the economy, because wartime really has a huge impact on the economy whenever there's conflict going on, especially on a global scale like this. So the fact that Trump had decided to execute on this war, and from this point on, he knew that this would not be an overnight war. Even though he would try to sell it like one to the American people, any conflict like this would take weeks, if not months, or as we know from Iraq and Afghanistan, even years. So at this point in time, over the 12-hour span of the day, there would be strikes back and forth between U.S. and Israeli allied forces against Iran. Now, one of the earlier parts of the day, we saw strikes from Israel, and they had actually targeted certain government buildings, which then impacted over 40 officials, including the leader himself, Ayatollah Khamenei. Now, this supreme leader, who in their government is almost more powerful than a president, where they are the one supreme ruler, but there's also a theological aspect to it where they are, religiously like superior. Now, from that point, right, or even spiritually superior, he ruled with an iron fist. So it was a very harsh government, very oppressive to their people, and they haven't been necessarily pro-democracy. And within the Iranian government, there's very strict rules on the hierarchy of different leaders between their judiciary committee, but also their assembly members, right? It's not very democratic, where only really the assembly members are voted upon. But then even the head of the assembly, those are all appointed positions coming from the supreme leader. So even just by the structure of the Iranian government, the supreme leader was almost like the heart. Early that morning from the strikes from Israel, the Ayatollah died. That was from the strikes from Israel. And this definitely escalated tensions, not only from the first strike on Iran, but now, their main leader is dead, thanks to the United States and Israel. So because of that, now we are seeing retaliation from a deeper level. There was always going to be counterattacks, but now this just upped the ante because of what that meant to the Iranian government and their people. So, now that the supreme leader is dead, the Iranian government will have to find not necessarily a successor, but this will also have to be this is like a power vacuum where the successor or the new ruler will have to not only determine a vision, but also a plan very much in the immediate future of how they're going to restructure things. And the idea of that is coming from the United States push for regime change, but this won't necessarily change how they function as a government, let alone what type of vision they have for their country. Now, from this back and forth, one of the first strikes that, or one of the first moves that Iran had decided to make was to not necessarily ease tension, but it was to not be as aggressive at first. So what I mean by that is that instead of going directly back after the United States or Israel, they opted for an additional route where they would then cut off the Strait of Hormuz. Now, Hormuz, this area is a very, very important area in terms of the world's oil. So getting 20% of the world's oil straight through the Strait of Hormuz, that is a lot of concentrated power. So what Iran does is that they close off the Strait of Hormuz in order to restrict the world's oil. Now, it's only going to 20% of the world, but these are global superpowers that this oil is being sent to, like China. So if the Strait of Hormuz in that area of the world is exporting 20% of the world's oil, with that oil going to other places right in the Middle East, but also to the east to China. And that, I think they actually use about 40% of their oil comes from that port. So 20% goes out to the world, but the share that goes to China makes up 40% of the oil they need on a daily basis. So you can see how now Iran decided to shut down the Strait of Hormuz, which would also then affect global dependencies like China, putting pressure on the US, saying that because the US and Israel attacked their country, this now will put others at risk through slow economic pain. So from that plan, we now know that the United States does not want to get blamed. This would be really bad in terms of international relations. And now we see a chance where Iran is able to put pressure on the United States indirectly. Now, from this plan, Trump is not happy. He does not want to be held responsible for, holding back the world's oil, or 20% of it. So what the United States winds up doing is actually then attacking back on Iran and striking their Navy ships. Now, we know President Trump lies. That is a fact. He lies. So I say that because it was quickly shared after the strikes that apparently 9 Navy ships were attacked. Attacked the Navy base, not necessarily specific ships or that we know of. So Trump saying 9, we don't know if it's 9, but it sounds like a number, right? So if that's all Trump needs, that's all he's really going to go with. So with that said, at least from the events that we researched, right, there are more decision makers and more that goes into each of these, but just know that's essentially what happened. The reaction around the world is what really has people unified right now. And what I mean by that is that most people do not want this war. We saw protests in New York City, Los Angeles, Berlin. Other parts of the world are all reacting to this news, and it is an escalation of what they're seeing from the United States, from trying to make Canada the 51st state, trying to take over Greenland, trying to start conflict in Mexico, and obviously, pretty much capture the leader of Venezuela, Nicolas Maduro, also a bad guy, but end of the day, these are all international events that Trump is doing within his second term. Not only are these wars fought between countries, but between industries. Think about it. We know that the war does create a huge type of stimulus for economies, right? It could either wreck economies or also stimulate. We know from American history that the war was a boom for the American economy in World War II. It brought women into the workforce. It obviously created a sense of morale while the men fought overseas. But this really created, helps boost the American economy. Well, people know that war equals profit. And unfortunately, that's exactly what we're seeing with both sides of the United States Congress. Republicans and Democrats both accept tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars from the military industrial complex, corporate PACs from these manufacturers. Now, the fact that they are, creating these weapons, right? It's advanced technology and it's an evolution of science, sure. But at the end of the day, the intent is to harm people on a mass scale. So we know that when our members of Congress are bought out by these huge multi-billion-dollar industries, we know we have to vote them out. We have to vote out the representatives who are accepting money, both Republican and Democrat, accepting money from these military industrial corporate PACs. It's not good. It's awful. And they're the ones who are controlling our leaders who are going to be more supportive for wartime efforts. And we don't want that, especially if it means taking money out of politics. The whole point of taking money out of politics in cases like this is so that we don't have companies buying away our freedoms, let alone forcing us into war. They're not the ones fighting the war, they're the ones profiting from it. We even saw AOC in one of her oversight hearings back in the day go after price gouging, making the American government pay a much higher price for their small little tools and supplies that they use on weapons of war. So the fact that this happens so frequently in our government, right? Whether you're a Democrat or a Republican, or even just an independent, like this is something we should all be demanding, that we want a clean slate from all of our elected officials. Should not be taking any money from any of those military industrial complex companies or corporate PACs because this is not what's going to keep us safe. Again, this is a developing story, so please make sure to do your research, check your sources, and make sure to be responsible when talking about such complex world issues. Now, I'd like to share 5 predictions that I have that are going to possibly come out of this conflict in Iran. So my first prediction is that now levels of aggression from world leaders will become more bold. I don't see this as a good thing, seeing how Trump just upped the ante, something we haven't seen in a very long time. Not only did he capture Nicolas Maduro in Venezuela, but now he took out a supreme leader in a Middle Eastern country that has a history, and a not a very good one, with the United States. So this will rise not only tensions in the Middle East from its people, from the populations in that area, but also this will signal that people will go much bolder in their acts of war. Now, whether it's another leader that is taken out or strikes that are more malicious or precisely calculated that really, creates a lot of pain, that is the goal now that will be seen throughout not only future attacks within this war, but also what we're going to see from other countries. My second prediction, we're actually going to see a shift in the AI industry. Now, what's been happening recently is that AI has been trying to, really boost as much of its investment, gaining as much capital as possible in order to really dominate as a new industry that's going to essentially control who rules the world. Now, that sounds, extreme, but when you really think about it, there have been talks of the United States using AI in mass surveillance and weapons of war. And we know this even from the events from this past week, right before Saturday. President Trump had given an AI company called Anthropic, he had given them a deadline of Friday saying, we want to work with you on this contract. We will give you a contract so you can work with us. However, we want to use your technology this certain type of way. And with this certain type of way, there can be no human safeguards. They actually did not want to give any sort of lockdown or suppression tool to make AI more safe or safer. What they wanted to do was to just take out the human safeguard, right? What do humans have that AI does not? Empathy. So President Trump and his Department of War really wanted to use AI in weaponry to more efficiently attack. This is not good. And now that we know that Trump had started this war in Iran, who is to say that this is not going to be an opportunity for the AI industry to push for conflict, right? So they can then try their technology on human lives. That's what I believe we're going to be seeing. It's another opportunity to invest in AI. So not only can we use it for 9 to 5 jobs, but then you'll see it used on the battlefield. And if they're trying to push for no human safeguards, this could get very ugly. My third prediction will be this conflict will be something that Trump draws out as long as possible. So he could potentially say, we are under a time of war, it's a national emergency. So he's going to then create this unrealized power to then cancel the 2026 midterm elections. I don't want this to be come to fruition. However, seeing how ruthless he has been and so brazen at just ignoring our Constitution, I would not be surprised if Trump really tries to pull this card. He can even tease it out there, right? He's been kind of joking, we don't need elections anymore, blah, blah, blah. This is not suitable for democracy. It's moments like this where there's a real possibility that the President of the United States can try to cancel elections or cause harm, at least sow enough confusion into the voters' minds that they won't even be able to trust the results of the 2026 midterm elections. The idea that right now we have, 50 states with 50 plus Washington D.C. with their own voting rules and policies at their state level or local level. Because of that, having a decentralized voting system, right? This actually keeps us more secure and safe from foreign attacks. If you take down the centralized system, all is gone. But if it's spread out across 50, then that would definitely change, the ease and make it even more complex in terms of trying to, cause a rift in the system. So fortunately, we are in a good spot, but that doesn't mean that there can't be election meddling, right? A lot of fake news and propaganda. So that is something that we will always have to contend with every election from here on out. But the best thing we can do, of course, is to stay informed, talk to friends, do your research, and just make sure that there's a constant loop of information, correct information out there, so that you can counter the fake news stories and be informed so you can then make sure you vote. Now, my fourth prediction, we are going to see what the war in Iran is going to do in American politics, particularly electoral politics. So this will now change not only how the Democratic primaries are picking their preferred candidates, but also the Republican primaries and how they're picking their preferred candidates. So on the Democratic side, we're definitely going to see more of an anti-war opposition. That would be the ideal goal that we see, especially from progressives and Democratic Socialist candidates. But we may be able to even nudge some more moderate closer to the left if they do come across as being too pro-war at a time when this war is very unpopular. Now, from that point, this will then transcend, right? If we take out more candidates that are accepting money from the military-industrial complex, right? That will be seen as a weakness if they are accepting that money. So we do have a chance as progressives to definitely push those candidates more to the left and bring them into the anti-war fold. Now, this is only for 2026, so that's going to depend on A, how many candidates we take out, but B, ultimately going to depend on how much money the military-industrial complex will funnel into super PACs supporting their preferred, more moderate center pro-war candidates. That's going to be a very interesting battle and could definitely shape how Congress is, determined. So this is not going to be good. Now, on the Republican side, we see that Trump loyalty is always the key within the party's base, right? They are very much aligned with wanting to have Trump and Trump-aligned candidates. However, Trump is unpopular with Republicans, especially now from this war. The base is not necessarily aligned with him on this one, especially after campaigning on no new wars, something that the America First movement really, really prides themselves on. So if their main guy is bringing them into a war that he campaigned against, This is not going to bode well for Republicans. So while most Republicans are seeking Trump support and approval, this might not work at this point in time. If Trump is seen unpopular by the Republican Party's base, then they won't be supporting necessarily the more Trump aligned candidates. So when you've got Trump endorsed candidates really now having to grapple with, do they support what's happening in the Middle East, or are they going to double down? Are they going to say they want to see more of the conflict happening in the Middle East? This will then, either pump out more ruby red alt right, Republican voters to support those candidates if they can really beat the war drum, or if there's been a true yearning for peace and more solace in the world and stability, there is a chance that some moderate Republicans will come out in favor to counter the Trump endorsed candidates in the primaries and give, maybe the other more establishment Republicans, give them the boost, straying from the far right, keeping it more to the moderate center. So this will be very interesting to see how this plays out with, of course, the military-industrial complex pumping in millions of dollars. So from all of that, it's going to be very interesting to see who the final crop gets voted in come November for both Republicans and Democrats. And from that point on, this will then change how we view 2028. In 2028, we know that right now, if former VP Kamala Harris enters the race, we know she will, we know that she will be the only candidate on that stage to have been in the Biden administration that supported the war in Gaza. What was happening over in the Middle East, that will definitely be a huge stain on her record. Now that she has to potentially either campaign, against Donald Trump's recklessness and against his meddling in the Middle East, she will then have to draw a contrast from herself without being too pro-war. If she has the experience of, being a more measured and an intelligent leader than Donald Trump, but she also has the record of loyally going along with both President Biden and Netanyahu for most of what was happening to the Palestinian people in Gaza. So because of that, Kamala Harris has also accepted money from AIPAC, meaning that with that support, she would not be seen necessarily as a pro-peace candidate as much as she would want to campaign on. Now, if her goal is getting out the progressive base, and we saw that she campaigned as a moderate, even having Liz Cheney, Republican Liz Cheney, the daughter of Vice President Dick Cheney, who was the mastermind or the chief architect, Operation Shock and Awe, but also what was happening in the Iraq War, we know that this is not going to bode well both for Harris and her prospects when trying to counter such a pro-war president like President Trump. So if the Democratic Party wants to draw that contrast, they have to become an anti-war party with strong opposition. This is going to be a very interesting era we're about to enter. This is going to be a very interesting era, especially in terms of global politics, what's happening here at home electorally, and what that will look like in terms of leadership in the years to come. Now, my last prediction, my fifth and final prediction, is that we are going to see a lot of change around the world very quickly. You will then be able to see changes, countries forming alliances, countries working together, other unions or pacts being created in order to really keep power more concentrated in areas with more allied forces or more alliances that are supporting each other's countries. And this is ideally to keep folks safe. Now, it doesn't mean every country in the world is going to be doing this, but definitely some key areas. Obviously, we know Western Europe. We definitely know China. We definitely know Russia being a potential contender in this. But then even would that bring in Ukraine, right? So we know that geopolitics will definitely be seeing a lot of changes very fast within the next few weeks, months, however long this conflict lasts. So at the end of the day, we know that the entire world is really held up not by the land that we stand on, but by the relationships that keep us together. This whole idea that right now, 3 countries in the world, Israel, Iran, and the United States, have now shifted global politics in a way that we have not seen in generations. Now, this is something that hopefully can be resolved quickly, but to be very honest, President Trump and the Trump administration sorely miscalculated this moment, thinking that this will erase the scandals of the Epstein files and knowing that Trump is very much hiding something from the American people. We also know that President Trump is performing horribly with approval ratings, some of the highest disapproval of any president, let alone of even his own years in office, even worse than his first term. And this is on the heels of the midterm elections when we know that the sway and power always goes to the other side. When the incumbent is a Democrat, it swings to Republican. When the Republican is incumbent, it swings to Democrat. We know that always happens, and it's been happening that way for the past few decades. So because of that, we are going to see potentially a huge wipeout. So unless Trump ruthlessly takes a hold of our elections in order to sway the vote in his favor, he is looking at a wipeout with him and his party. And that should put all the Republicans and those who support President Trump on edge between then and 2028, when either Trump runs for a third term, which he cannot do it, or J.D. Vance or Marco Rubio fill his spot, and they will be left vulnerable because neither of them have the power of President Trump. Love him or hate him, President Trump will go down in history with the moves he's making. This is horrible for American story, horrible for our legacy, and horrible for the future of the world. With everything going on in the world, all we can do is stay hopeful. Be kind to one another. Try to have these conversations with people you trust and know that you can actually create a common bond with your concern over what's happening around the world, but also keeping peace at home. So please, whatever you do, make sure to talk about these issues with care, talk about them in a more nuanced way that does contextualize a lot of the new information that may be flying around. We know that this event is a developing story, so please keep in mind that facts may change and try to stick to reliable resources, right? The more we stay informed, the more we inform each other, the more we can actually help each other and keep peace around the world. Now we have the opportunity to really use our voice. You can also get involved, hopefully in a local protest near you. On Saturday, February 28th, there were protests all over the world. Use their voices in the streets of Berlin, of Los Angeles, of New York City to protest this war in Iran, letting people know that we need to end this war. This will build the momentum we need to finally get it done. Now, of course, you can also contact your representative, both your member of Congress and member of the United States Senate. You'll need to call 202-224-3121. This is the number you'll need to contact the Capitol operator. From there, if you know your zip code, they can then direct you to your correct representative. But then also let them know how you're feeling. It's one thing to say, please don't vote that. But it's another thing to say, I've been voting for you for quite some time. I support what you do, but please, this is not the time to do that. This is awful. Innocent lives are being taken. We need to, show America the values that we're made of, also promote peace in the world and not, and not vote in favor of XYZ bill. Like, these are the types of conversations you'll have to be having with your congressional rep. Now, granted, when you call, they're going to be giving to their office, and someone at the office desk will be answering those calls. If not, it goes to operator, or if not, it goes to voicemail, and then from there, you leave a message. Short and sweet, straight to the point, but let them hear in your voice how you're feeling about this. The more emotion, but even the more power you have in your voice, they will take that to heart. That is really what moves the needle. Emails and social media posts, easy to do, we know that, but we know from the inside that it's really these calls to the representative that really changes their mind, because that means someone took time out of their day, hop on the phone, right? Call the operator, leave their message. It's a lot more involved, especially as a constituent, to take the time to do that. So, as much as social media and email is good, a stronger tool is definitely getting on the phone and calling. So, I highly recommend you do that. Call the Capitol operator, let your representative know how you're feeling about the situation. The number is 202 224 3121. Now, if you like what you heard or want to learn more, make sure to subscribe to Not Suitable for Democracy. You can subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube. Or if you want to follow along for more content, then make sure to follow on Instagram and TikTok. I use the same handle for both, so you can follow along at NSFD_pod. Thank you so much for watching. I truly appreciate you tuning in, coming to learn and build so we can have a stronger and more resilient democracy. And remember, democracy is not suitable without you.